Hello and welcome. So I feel like, for the most part, people's music taste is shaped by one or two artists that you listen to when you're young. And for me, one of those artists was definitely Hollywood Undead. So I've been listening to Hollywood Undead since I was in high school. And I was into Swan Songs, and it's still a really good album. I still really love that album. But I think it was American Tragedy that really kind of set the stage for what kind of music I would end up listening to. Partially because that was one of the first kind of heavier shows I ever went to, and I really enjoyed that over the pop punk shows I had been to before that. So I had heard about, the drama that had happened between them and Deuce, with him leaving, and then some other things a little bit later on, and I'd kind of seen and heard a little bit, but at the time I kind of just instantly sided with Hollywood Undead and Danny because American Tragedy was just so influential to me. But it was still interesting nonetheless. And when I saw Deuce's name come up when I did my last Davi video, I thought it might be really interesting to look back at it now that I've learned to look a little bit more from the outside, and I'm also just not as big into Hollywood Undead as I was. So yeah, I thought it'd be interesting. So here's Hollywood Undead, the story of Deuce. Deuce has gone by a few names over the years. The Producer, the Whiz Kid, Big Deuce, and I'll skip over the obvious jokes that could be made there, and look at his early career when he was still going by his birth name, Aaron Ehrlichman? I don't really know how to say it, to be honest. But he posted a few songs to a website called Broadjam, and you can actually still find them here today. Before forming Hollywood Undead, Deuce, J-Dog, and Johnny Three Tears had a band named Three Tears. They only had a couple songs, and I couldn't really find too much about this entire era about them. But it's funny because all the websites I kept seeing though kept saying that they disbanded when they formed Hollywood Undead, but wouldn't that just be rebranding? I don't know. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. I just thought that was kind of weird wording for it, but he grew up with J-Dog, and through various friendships and musical outings, they eventually found enough people to form Hollywood Undead's first lineup. While he was in Hollywood Undead, they released Swan Songs, which is, to this day, still one of their most popular, but also more polarizing. Even now, when I look on Apple Music, everywhere I go, and Undead are still the two top favorite songs by them. But the success of Swan Songs wasn't enough to keep them together. In 2009, Deuce left the band, or was kicked out, depending on which side you ask. But this is where things get a little, he said, she said kind of thing, because they're both sides are saying fairly different things. So let's get into what they were saying in interviews and such after Deuce left. So Charlie Scene said in an interview with World Famous Rock that Deuce never showed up for tour after they didn't want to pay his $800 per week assistant. And then Johnny Three Tears and the Curls also spent like 4 minutes talking shit about him to Bryan Stars in an interview, and I'll put a couple clips in here. Like I said, it's a 4-minute video of them shit talking, but they do say a couple things, so I'll cut them in here.
About the band, something that's just so far-fetched.
Well, one of the guys who used to be in our band talks a lot on the internet, and he's kind of like those little prick kids. He reminds me of one of them because he has nothing to do and he's like upset about it. So he just talks shit all day on the internet. But the funny thing is, if I ever saw him, he would run in the other direction as fast as he possibly could. But he says all this crap online and stuff and in songs, and it's just because he's like jealous or upset or whatever. And I understand that, but it's his own fault. And he says this stuff, but I mean, he's such a pussy. And like the guys he hangs out with are such pussies.
300 responses. What's the reason for Deuce leaving Hollywood Undead?
I'm not getting into specifics. It's just that things weren't working out. Like, sometimes, like I told you, those situations we were in together, you're either a team member or you're not. And like, you go through that stuff together and you have to be a tight unit, because if you're not, you can fall apart from at the seams. It's a tough job. A lot of people think it's just glitz and glamour. There's a lot of hard work and dirt that we have to go through. And it just wasn't working out. We weren't
officially decided that we have no reason to even speak about it. I mean, to be honest, even telling you as much as he has is actually the furthest we've gone. We don't want to acknowledge it because he's sitting there saying whatever he's saying. Now, people are either going to believe it or they're going to think he's full of shit. We're just going to keep doing what we do, and that's it. Like, we're obviously... I don't think there would have been another record if he was still with us. Like, Danny...
The first thing both of them say is that they don't really want to talk about it, and that they just want to move on. And the Curls even says that that's the most they've really talked about it since, I guess. I mean, which is kind of weird considering, like I said, Johnny kind of spent 3 minutes just calling Deuce a pussy, that is funny. It doesn't really add too much to anything. All they really said that it just wasn't working out, and then they're doing better without him. Deuce, on the other hand, wasn't quite as quiet as Hollywood Undead. They didn't talk too much about it unless they were asked about it. Even then, they tried to kind of push it off. But Deuce was a little bit more direct with it, I guess. I mean, the first song he released after leaving was called Story of a Snitch. And, I mean, it's not a bad song. I don't mind it. But a lot of it does just feel like name calling, which, I mean, that is what diss tracks are, I guess. But he also kind of makes some accusations. It also feels like he makes some accusations that never end up being followed through with. But that's kind of somewhat a theme with him, I feel. But then he also kind of fired back at them in an interview with Bryan Stars again.
Yeah.
What the fuck happened to you in Hollywood Undead, man?
It's a long story, man. It's a long story.
Give me the short version.
I mean, if I could break it down to like fucking, there's jealousy, obviously I'm the fucking,
You're the shit.
I'm the lead singer of my band, and no one likes me because I'm the lead singer of the band, Not really, I wrote all of Swan's songs, I produced it, so it wasn't musical differences, it was, they didn't want me to, stay in charge of the music and be the creative decision over it,
You said you didn't write all the songs.
Look at the credits on the record.
Look at the hey, who gets the most money off that shit?
Assistant on tour,
He's right here.
and that
This is who they were talking about. This guy.
Yeah, I rolled up.
Yeah.
Deuce wanted his
Yuma.
equipment set up. He paid for me out of his own pocket, so that's his personal.
they said that they had to pay for it.
Oh yeah, that was when I was like grabbing them beers and setting up their equipment all day.
Okay.
I was
They
the
don't-
HU roadie the first tour.
They don't-
He doesn't say too much, I guess. I mean, he did address the thing that Charlie Steen said about his assistant. And when I looked into the producer and writer credits on Swan Songs, he does have a writer credit on almost every song, and a producer credit for almost all of them. So I mean, yeah, I can see why he says that he wrote the entire album, but at the same time, Johnny Three Tears also has a lot of writer credits, and I mean, like any band, it seemed like it was a fairly group process. There were a couple songs that seemed very just Deuce, but for the most part, I mean, it looked like a fairly almost balance. I mean, yes, Deuce was on every song, but we can't know how much work anyone put into any song. That only they know. That's something only they know. And then there was one more thing in 2012. Deuce accused J-Dog and I believe Funny Man, I'm pretty sure it was Funny Man, of jumping him after one of his shows. But again, it's all word of mouth. We will never know the full exact truth. We will never know exactly what happened between them. And I find that fascinating. Because stuff like that can divide the fan base. And then when fan bases divide, they can get toxic. Which, while can be a bad thing, can also be kind of a funny thing. Like, I've seen 3 types of fans while researching this. Mostly originally years ago, not as much now, but you still get the occasional, either Deuce loyalist, only listen to his solo stuff or Swan Songs. A Danny loyalist, which anything after from American Tragedy after is good. And then the everyone else who either doesn't know enough about it or just doesn't care. But looking at this a little bit more objectively though, and not being as big a fan of Hollywood Undead has changed my mind on a couple of points that I originally outright sided with Hollywood Undead, like the assistant thing. I thought that Deuce was just lying. I would not even hear that he wasn't lying. And I think that's kind of where this video ended up changing my perspective, not just with Hollywood Undead and Deuce, but with just fandoms in general. I find them very interesting now. And I kind of want to look into, a bunch of different ones. And, there's some weird things on the internet that I don't understand why they have fans. But I'd kind of like to look into it and see why people like things and why people choose the sides they do when things fall out between their favorite creators or bands, or I feel like that is very interesting. But I think with that, we will end the video. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed making this video, especially compared to the Davi stuff. The Davi stuff can get pretty intense sometimes. But I do have another Davi video coming in the next week or so, hopefully. Hopefully want to start getting these videos a little bit closer together. But yeah, thanks again for watching. Like if you like, dislike if you didn't, and subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you next time.